They said he died on the steps of the Great September, his head displayed before the masses in a final act of cruelty by the Boy King. Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North, was executed for treason in the broad light of day before a jeering crowd. The blow that severed his head from his shoulders had been swift and merciless, executed by Ser Ilan Payne under the command of King Joffrey Baratheon. Many remembered the shock on Ned's face, that fleeting expression of sorrow and resignation as he looked upon his daughter Sansa, the moment frozen in horror. The North remembered too, and the outrage in the North ran hot as molten steel when news finally traveled. Yet the realm, so accustomed to tragedy and violence, soon turned its attention to other horrors. The war that exploded after Ned's death, the fracturing of alliances, the scattering of houses, and the petty games of power played by lords and ladies who saw in chaos a chance to gain. Nobody, least of all the city dwellers, expected what came many moons later. Whispers were carried on the winds from the southern deserts of Dorne to the frozen mountains beyond the wall. It was an outrageous rumor, a piece of gossip that seemed too blasphemous or too absurd to be believed. Eddard Stark had risen. The rumor was initially dismissed as typical peasant superstitions, stories that often took root in times of turmoil. Yet the talk persisted, growing louder with each passing day, as travelers along the King's Road swore they had glimpsed a tall, gaunt figure bearing Ned Stark's unmistakable gray eyes. In the Riverlands, a wandering band of outlaws claimed to have encountered a man wearing the direwolf sigil, silent and grim. Elsewhere, there were stories of a robed red priestess heading north with a hooded companion. The truth was far stranger. Melisandre of Ashai, counselor to Stannis Baratheon and devotee of the Lord of Light, had performed a ritual in secret. In the blackness of a starless night, beneath the flickering glow of torches dampened by sea winds, she had invoked powers the West had scarcely glimpsed. Her voice rose in incantation to Lawler, the Red God, calling forth the spark of life from beyond the veil. She sought not a simple demonstration of her faith. This was not the mere cleansing of a shadow nor the forging of illusions. She pursued something far greater, the improbable, forbidden miracle of bringing a man back from the dead. That man had been Eddard Stark, or what was left of him. It began with stolen bones. Though Joffrey had displayed Ned's head, though the bones had been packed for transport back to the north, Melisandre's followers managed to acquire certain crucial remains. A charred fragment of bone, an unrecognizable portion of skin, a scattering of blood-stained hair. These relics were removed from their rightful couriers by men in black robes who bowed reverently to Melisandre. Some said the Red Priestess bided her time until the tide of war shifted in just the right way, allowing her to slip away from Dragonstone with an entourage of loyal servants. She traveled under darkness, her presence cloaked by illusions of shadow and flame, performing rites in secrecy that even those close to her did not fully understand. In her mind, Stannis's claim to the throne was paramount, but perhaps she saw some future in the flames that guided her to Ned Stark. Perhaps she believed he had a role yet to play, a puzzle piece necessary for the final victory against the Great Other. On the eve of the ritual, a storm battered the coastline, huge waves slamming into jagged rocks. Lightning shattered the sky. Within a circle of weirwood branches arranged in a sacred pattern, the Red Woman stood over what remained of Ned Stark. She had to use illusions and cunning to retrieve Ned's skull, for it had been displayed on a spike for months in King's Landing, bleached by the sun and battered by the elements. Yet retrieve it she did, along with other portions of his remains that had never been returned to the north. By the time she stood in that ring of kindling, she had pieced together enough of Lord Stark's body to conduct the unholy rite. Incense spiraled into the air, pungent and sharp, its fragrance half choking the red acolytes who dared stand close. Melisandre's eyes glowed with a grim fervor as she began chanting in the tongue of Ashai, calling on the Lord of Light to fill the empty husk before her with a spark of his fire. There was no immediate flash of red, no grand theatrics, no sudden burst of flame that scorched the night sky. Instead, the ritual lingered in a slow boil of tension, a thrumming in the air that caused every hair on her followers' necks to stand on end. The wind died and the crashing surf fell oddly silent. Shadows stretched and crawled at the edge of the torchlight as if they were alive, reaching toward the center of that circle. With each repetition of the arcane chant, Melisandre dripped hot wax from a crimson candle onto the remains, forming a pattern that glowed with embers. She pressed a ruby against bone, letting her blood flow across it. Her voice rose to a fever pitch, and just when the watchers feared something in the sky might tear open, she exhaled a trembling breath. For a moment, there was only emptiness. A hush fell so absolute that it seemed the entire world held its breath in anticipation. Then a single flicker of life, like a tiny flame on a wick, sparked behind the hollow of what had been Ned Stark's eyes. It was a faint glow, barely visible, but it pulsed. Melisandre's incantation continued, forcing that glow to intensify. Bone knitted, flesh reformed, though not perfectly. The watchers saw the impossible, tissue winding over bone, sinew tightening, color returning to once pallid skin. It happened slowly, an abomination against the natural order. Yet Melisandre pressed on. When the chanting finally ceased, Ned Stark lay there, breathing shallowly, a man caught between two states of being. He opened his eyes. They were the same gray eyes that had once witnessed so much hardship in the north, the eyes that had gazed upon the quiet hush of snowfall on Winterfell, the eyes that had welled with tears at the birth of each child. But there was something else within them, something distant and haunted, a shadow cast by the void he had traveled. He breathed once, then coughed, and that cough racked his entire frame. Melisandre draped a cloak over him and softly murmured words of comfort. She led him away from the circle, from the watchers, and deep into a labyrinth of corridors carved into the rock beneath a distant fortress. There, in flickering torchlight, she offered him water and let him rest. When Ned first awoke fully, some hours or days later, for time passed strangely in the aftermath of resurrection, he found himself leaning against a cold stone wall, a blanket around his shoulders. Despite the warmth of candles, a chill lodged in his bones that refused to fade. He touched his neck, expecting to find a wound or a scar, but felt only smooth skin. Confused, he traced the shape, remembering in an instant the final moments of his life. His head had been on the chopping block, the blade descending. He recalled the sting of betrayal, the flash of steel, and then nothing but blackness. In that blackness, there had been flickers of voices, his father's voice, perhaps, or the faint laughter of his children. A part of him had drifted in an endless dark, aware but powerless, longing for release or reunion with those he had loved and lost. Now he was here, wherever here was, alive or half alive. He felt a heaviness in his limbs, a faint ache that spread through his muscles as if they were newly grown. He also felt an emptiness in his chest, a strangeness in his very being. He did not feel hungry or thirsty in a natural way. These sensations were muted, overshadowed by a constant awareness of having been severed from something intangible. The only immediate warmth came from the flaming torches along the rough stone walls and from the presence of a woman in crimson robes who entered softly. She introduced herself as Melisandre, the Red Woman, a servant of Lawler, the Lord of Light. She spoke with quiet reverence, explaining that he had been granted a second life, that the great other, the darkness, had been thwarted by the Red God's flame. Ned could barely speak. His voice rasped, hoarse from disuse, from the unimaginable. At first, he demanded answers. Where were his children? Was Arya safe? Had Robb marched south for war? The flood of questions poured out of him. Melisandre answered sparingly, choosing her words with the care of a spider weaving a web. She told him that months had passed since his execution, that war raged across the Seven Kingdoms, that Robb had indeed been hailed as king in the north, that Sansa remained in King's Landing as a hostage. Of Arya, she had no certain tidings. Of Bran and Rickon, she said they were rumored to be in Winterfell, guarded by loyal men, though the Ironborn threatened the coasts. Melisandre omitted much, focusing instead on the reason for his resurrection. According to her visions, the War of Five Kings was only a petty struggle compared to the true war coming from the icy realms beyond the wall. The living needed champions, souls of unwavering honor, to rally them in the face of an ancient evil. It was too much to take in. Ned sank his face into his hands, trembling. He could not reconcile the truth of his new existence with the memory of his death. All he had ever wanted was to protect his family, to keep them safe, to do his duty. Now, chance or fate or the will of some foreign god had ripped him from the quiet realms of the afterlife and thrust him back into a world that was more precarious than ever. In those first days, he barely rose from his bed of furs and rough blankets. He stared at the stones, remembering the great hall of Winterfell, the softness of his wife's voice, the swirl of color in his children's laughter. He replayed the final moments before his execution, the jeers of the crowd, the dryness in his mouth, the shame he felt for having falsely confessed to treason to spare Sansa. The memory of the blade haunted him. Yet a man like Ned Stark could not wallow forever. He summoned strength from the same deep well that had sustained him through Robert's rebellion, through the raising of 5 children, through the endless responsibilities of being Warden of the North. Slowly, he began to speak with Melisandre to question the nature of her faith and the reasons behind her actions. She told him of visions in the flames, images of ice spreading across the world, devouring cities and fields while monstrous creatures swarmed from the north. She saw glimpses of a man with a direwolf's face, a king crowned in snow, and she saw Ned's visage, stern, sorrowful, standing by this king's side. She believed that Ned Stark still had a part to play, a role that would shape the fate of the living. One night, when the fortress was quiet save for the howling winds outside, Melisandre led him to a small chamber lit by a single brazier. She urged him to peer into the fire to look for truths. Hesitantly, Ned gazed into the dancing flames. At first, he saw only flickers of red and orange. Then shapes began to form, distant images that shimmered and vanished too quickly to grasp. He thought he saw the silhouette of the wall, so high and forbidding, and a flicker of white that could have been the face of a white or a white walker. He saw shapes that might have been wolves or men in wolfskins. He saw something else, a fleeting face with red hair. Was it Sansa or Melisandre herself? And he saw Winterfell's courtyard, a place of memory, and something black coiling like a shadow across its snows. Then the vision faded, leaving him shaken and uncertain. Melisandre's voice was calm. She understood that the gift of seeing would not come to him so easily. His role, as she believed, was not that of a seer. His was that of a reborn champion of honor and justice, a man whose unbreakable code would stand in defiance of the horrors to come. She claimed that R'hllor had allowed him to retain his essence, his sense of duty, his stern compassion, while granting him freedom from certain mortal constraints. Ned, however, felt no different aside from the deep, abiding sense of not belonging. He was neither wholly alive nor truly dead. At times, he felt his heart throb with distant echoes of those who had passed. But each morning, the burden of existence weighed upon him, reminding him that he had responsibilities yet unfulfilled. Melisandre asked him to pledge himself to the Lord of Light. She said that if he gave himself over to R'hllor, he would find purpose and power in the coming battles, that the flame would guide him to protect the realm. But Ned Stark, even in this new, unearthly existence, was a man of the North. He remembered the old gods, the silent faces in the weirwood trees. Though he was grateful, or at least not entirely resentful, for the second chance, his loyalty did not come so easily. He told Melisandre he would not forsake the gods of his fathers. The Red Priestess accepted this with a curious half-smile, as though she had foreseen such a response. She said nothing more of his conversion, only that he must travel north soon. Forces in the north would need him. It was no easy journey. Their company was small. Just Ned, Melisandre, and a handful of her devout followers, along with 2 silent guards whose eyes spoke of unflinching loyalty. They traveled by night to avoid drawing attention, first sailing from a hidden cove near Dragonstone to a lonely shore near Crackclaw Point. From there, they took winding roads and seldom-used trails. Ned wore a hooded cloak that obscured his features, because if the small folk recognized him, the shock alone could spark panic. He listened to rumors in taverns along the way, that Robb Stark had won great victories against the Lannisters, that King Renly Baratheon had been slain under mysterious circumstances, that Stannis was besieging Storm's End, that Balon Greyjoy had crowned himself king of the Isles in the north, and that Joffrey still sat the Iron Throne in King's Landing. And always, among the news of war and betrayal, there were whispers of white-fleshed monsters and corpses rising in the far north. Even the common folk sensed that something dreadful stirred beyond the wall. Every so often, Ned would pause at the edge of a forest, touching the trunk of a great tree, half expecting to see the carved face of a weirwood. He longed for the calm hush of the godwood, the feeling of home that Winterfell had always given him. But that was far away, a dream on the horizon. At night, when he closed his eyes, he thought he felt the presence of his children in some far-off place. He worried for them, especially for his daughters. He prayed silently to the old gods that Arya was alive, that Sansa would remain unscathed by the vipers of King's Landing. During this trek northward, Ned discovered that while his body had been restored, it retained certain frailties. He tired easily, and sometimes a pain flared at the base of his neck, a phantom ache where the sword had ended his life. Other times, he felt as though his heart barely beat. One night, while crossing a small stone bridge over a freezing stream, Ned lost his footing and fell into the icy water. He emerged soaked and shivering. One of Melisandre's silent guards rushed forward, but Ned climbed out on his own. Though he felt the cold biting into his bones, he did not suffer the usual trembling that would follow such a mishap. His sense of temperature was off, or so it seemed. Melisandre observed him with an unreadable expression, as if she was making notes for some deeper purpose. He confronted her about that. He asked her what the price of his resurrection truly was. She told him every act of power demands a sacrifice, blood, life, or that which is held most dear. When he asked what precisely had been sacrificed, Melisandre only replied that she had given of her own blood, that shadows had been birthed from her, that in the fires she had glimpsed the necessity of this act. She did not elaborate. Ned felt uneasy. He wondered if he was a puppet dancing on her strings, intended to serve some hidden agenda. But he could sense no falsehood in her eyes. She was sincere in her belief that the greater war demanded champions reborn from fire. As they progressed through the riverlands, the devastation of war greeted them at every turn. Burned-out farmsteads, charred fields, and the stench of death. Villagers with hollow eyes begged for scraps. Ragged remnants of soldiers roamed the countryside, some turning to banditry in desperation. At times, Melisandre used a strange power to ward off threats, whispering words to Lawler that caused flames to flicker unnaturally, scaring off those who might have attacked. Ned intervened only once, when a group of desperate men cornered a small family by the roadside. He emerged from the shadows, sword in hand, a sword borrowed from one of the guards, not his beloved ice, which was lost, and the sight of this grim, tall figure with ghost-pale skin was enough to make the men flee. The family he saved offered tearful thanks, but Ned hardly felt he deserved it. He was not the man he once was, and the illusions he held about honor had already been tested. Winter was creeping south. Though autumn still technically gripped the land, the nights were cold, and hoarfrost glittered on the ground each dawn. Ned remembered the words of his house. Winter is coming. Now they felt more ominous than ever. He recalled old Nan's tales of the long night, of the others who brought death and misery upon the living. The legends seemed more real with each passing step, more tangible. In the darkest hours before dawn, Ned sometimes dreamt of blue-eyed wights clawing at the gates of Winterfell, of his children besieged within while he stood on the outside, powerless to help. The day they reached the outskirts of Moat Cailin, they heard the horns announcing the presence of northern outriders. Robb Stark's army had marched south, but some force had apparently returned to hold this strategic choke point. Ned hesitated. He was uncertain how his own people would react to the sight of him. The guards were reluctant to approach, but Melisandre insisted they move forward. Their party was small enough that no immediate threat was perceived. Men bearing the direwolf sigil on their cloaks approached, demanding they halt. Ned stood at the rear, hooded, allowing Melisandre to do the talking. She explained that they were travelers from the south, pilgrims of the Lord of Light, seeking safe passage to Winterfell. The northern soldiers exchanged wary glances, suspicious of red robes and foreign gods. But the leader, a grizzled man with a scar across his chin, finally allowed them to proceed. Melisandre refused to linger among the soldiers, instructing her company to push on. They bypassed the main camp at Moat Cailin under escort. Ned kept his head down. He saw the men's curious stares, felt their gazes linger. He noticed that the Northmen were tired, their ranks thinned by war. Even so, they displayed a fierce resolve, proud to hold the ancient fortress that guarded the road north. Ned longed to reveal himself, to tell them he was there, that Ned Stark had returned, but he did not know how they would react to his unnatural resurrection. Not yet. Instead, he left them behind, continuing the journey toward Winterfell. As they approached the familiar territory of the north, Ned could sense a change. The air felt crisper, the pines deeper in hue, the caw of ravens more ominous. Memories crowded him at every turn. The hush of the godswood at dawn, the swirl of snow. In the courtyard where he used to watch his children at play, the voice of Maester Luwin reading old histories by the library's firelight. His soul ached for the comfort of the walls that had sheltered his house for generations. And yet he was afraid too, uncertain how Winterfell would greet a man pulled from the grave. They arrived at Winterfell under the cover of late evening. Smoke curled from the chimneys and the battlements were lit by torches. Soldiers in Stark livery stood guard. Word of travelers from the south had preceded them, and while the gates were not thrown open in welcome, neither were they barred. Still, there was confusion in the courtyard when the group entered. Stable boys rushed to tend the horses, eyeing the crimson-robed woman and her silent guards with a mixture of awe and mistrust. Ned, hooded, stepped onto the familiar cobblestones and felt a surge of emotion that nearly overwhelmed him. The sense of home, wood smoke, damp stone, the faint musk of the kennels hit him with unexpected force. His breath caught, and for a moment all the world seemed to tilt. The steward approached, bowing slightly to Melisandre, asking what business brought her to Winterfell. She announced that she had urgent news for the Lady of Winterfell. The steward frowned. Lady Catelyn Stark was rumored to be in the south with her son, the king, in the north. That left Maester Luwin and Ser Roderick Castle to oversee the castle in her absence. Summoned by a page, Maester Luwin soon appeared, his chain rattling softly. He gazed at the newcomers with skepticism, then offered a cordial greeting. Melisandre repeated that she carried tidings of great importance. Luwin invited her inside. In the great hall, the warmth of the hearth enveloped them. Servants brought hot cider and bread. Ned stood in the shadows, his heart pounding. He wanted to stride forward, to embrace the old maester who had taught his children, who had served House Stark faithfully for decades. But he held back. He remembered his reflection in a mirror days before. He looked much the same as he had in life, though paler, gaunter. His hair had turned a shade more like ash than brown, and in certain lights his eyes held a sheen that was eerie. Would Luwin see him as a walking corpse, or would the old man break down in tears of relief? Ned did not have the courage to find out. Not yet. Melisandre spoke with Luwin about the threat in the north, about the White Walkers, about visions of ice. The maester, ever logical, expressed doubt, though he admitted the old tales spoke of such creatures. She insisted that Winterfell must prepare, that the realm's petty wars would pale before the oncoming storm. Luwin listened with polite concern, but Ned could see the doubt etched across his face. He turned his gaze toward the tall, hooded figure in the corner and asked who that was. Melisandre paused a moment, then said simply, "He is the man who once was your lord." Silence fell. Servants who had been lingering with trays stopped in their tracks. Luwin peered at the hooded figure with curiosity, then confusion, then a hint of alarm. Ser Roderick Castle, who had joined them by then, stepped forward, his hand drifting reflexively toward the hilt of his sword. The tension in the hall thickened. Ned, feeling the eyes of those he'd known for years upon him, slowly lowered his hood. Gasps erupted. Servants exchanged frantic looks. Ser Roderick's eyes went wide in a mix of recognition and terror. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. Maester Luwin stumbled back a step, pressing a hand to his chest as though his heart had seized. Ned's voice, still raspy, cut through the hush. "It is I," he said quietly. "Or a part of me. I know how this must look." A strangled cry came from one of the older servants, who clapped a hand over her mouth. The rest seemed rooted in place, unsure whether to kneel or flee. Ser Roderick drew in a shaking breath, then demanded, "Who stands before us?" "Some specter conjured by dark magic." His tone held both fear and the protective anger that had always fueled him. Maester Luwin, eyes brimming with tears, whispered, "My lord, how can this be?" Ned took a step closer, carefully raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "The Red Woman speaks truth," he said. "I was brought back." He cast a glance at Melisandre. "By forces I do not fully understand." Chaos erupted. Ser Roderick cursed, calling it an abomination, demanding answers. Some in the hall dropped to their knees, crossing themselves in the old fashion. Others fled as though expecting Ned to sprout horns or burst into flames. Maester Luwin, tears streaking his cheeks, approached Ned haltingly, trembling hands reaching out. Gently he touched Ned's face, feeling the warmth of living skin. He pressed his fingers to Ned's wrist, searching for a pulse. He found one, faint yet steady. "My lord," he murmured, voice wavering. "You live. Or, gods, you feel alive." Ned placed a hand over the maester's, remembering all the kindness the old man had given his family. "It is me," Ned said softly. "I remember everything." Then, gently, he relayed small details only he could know, such as the day Luwin had taught him the properties of certain herbs, or the time Rickon was born and had wailed so fiercely Luwin joked he would be a singer. Tears spilled more freely down the maester's face, and he clutched Ned's hand in disbelief and joy and no small amount of fear. Ser Roderick looked torn, knuckles white on his sword's hilt. "If you were truly Ned Stark," he said, voice shaking, "tell me something only you and I would know. Something from the days before all this madness." Ned closed his eyes, remembering. 1,000 moments of camaraderie, battles fought side by side, the small quips they shared. Finally, he recalled a day decades ago after Robert's rebellion when Ser Roderick had been gravely wounded. "I nursed you back to health after we retook Mo Caelan," Ned said. You insisted on rising from your bed to spar, and when you collapsed from the pain, you wept not from injury but from frustration that you couldn't guard me properly. I swore to you that day that you would always be my shield in spirit if not in body." Ser Roderick's features, usually stern, crumpled. He sheathed his sword. "My lord," he whispered, blinking back tears. "Gods be good." That was enough. Though many in Winterfell still regarded him with anxiety or reverence laced with terror, the word spread quickly. Lord Eddard Stark had returned from death, his body restored by some red sorcery. The castle was abuzz with speculation and rumor, and many found it hard to sleep that night, the corridors thick with hushed chatter. Melisandre remained in the background, observing, offering no more explanation than the barest necessity. Ned, for his part, felt exhaustion so profound it bordered on despair. He had dreamed of coming home, but this was no joyous homecoming. He saw the fear and awe in the faces of those who once greeted him with warm smiles. They regarded him now as something other, something unnatural. Still, there was comfort in the smallest things, the smell of fresh bread in the kitchens, the hush of the godwood in the morning light. The heart tree stood as it ever had, its carved face solemn and watchful. When Ned knelt before it, he felt tears spill onto the mossy ground. He pressed his forehead against the trunk, seeking a connection with the old gods. He sensed something. Not the usual peace. There was a stirring in the ancient wood, a questioning presence that seemed to regard him as a stranger. The feeling unsettled him. He remembered the old tales that the weirwoods had eyes, that they saw into men's souls, and he wondered what they saw in him now. In the following days, Ned spoke with Maester Luwin and Ser Roderick at length. They told him of the events that had transpired since his death, the War of the Five Kings, Robb's victories against the Lannisters, the news that Arya was missing, believed to be somewhere in the Riverlands or possibly dead, and that Sansa remained a captive in King's Landing. Bran and Rickon were in Winterfell for a time under the protection of loyal men, but rumors held that Theon Greyjoy had turned on them, capturing Winterfell briefly. There had been a revolt, something about Ramsay Snow, and the young princes had vanished, presumed slain. The castle had changed hands multiple times, but eventually the Northmen loyal to Robb had reclaimed it. The war raged still, far to the south, though the Ironborn continued to harry the northern coasts. Ned listened in growing horror. The tragedies were too many to bear. He had died, and in his absence, the realm had descended into further chaos. His children had scattered like leaves in a gale. Sorrow weighed heavily on him, and his new existence made it even more difficult to grapple with the flood of emotions. He asked to see the crypts. Late one evening, accompanied by torchlight, Ned descended the winding steps into the darkness beneath Winterfell. The air was cold and still. Ancient kings of winter slept there, stone statues atop their tombs, dire wolves at their feet. His own father, Rickard Stark, rested in a tomb further down. The flickering torch revealed the details of the carved face, stern, noble. Next to him lay Brandon and Lyanna. Ned paused there, recalling the tragedies that had taken them too soon. Then, with trembling steps, he moved to the end, where a tomb lay prepared for him, empty. The tomb was unsealed, for his bones had never arrived from King's Landing. The statue was not completed. A sense of deep unease rippled through him. He looked upon his own resting place, a stone effigy bearing a faint likeness of his face. It was an echo of a future that had been undone by red magic. He heard a voice then, a soft shuffle from behind. Melisandre stood at the edge of the torchlight. "You were not meant for that place," she said, her voice echoing in the crypt. "Not yet." Ned turned to her. "Perhaps," he murmured, "but I do not feel as though I belong here, either." She studied him, eyes catching the glow of the torch. "I understand your sorrow. Life and death are not simple. You have crossed a threshold few ever return from." Ned said nothing, only stared at the tomb that might have been his. After a moment, he closed his eyes, recalling fragments of the darkness that had embraced him after his beheading. He remembered the voices, though faint, Catelyn calling to him, Robb's outraged cries, Sansa's pleas, even Arya's name on the wind. Part of him wished he had remained in that blackness, for at least there, his sense of failure might be dulled by oblivion. But another part of him clenched at the injustice of what had befallen his children, his house, his people. That part of him burned with a quiet determination that seemed to flare stronger each day. "If the gods have allowed this," he finally said, "then I must do my duty." Not long after, a raven arrived from the south. It carried tidings that Robb Stark was in the Riverlands, engaged in a fierce campaign against the Lannisters, who were now allied with the Tyrells after Renly's death. Catelyn Stark was reportedly at Riverrun, her father's castle, trying to broker alliances. The message did not mention Arya or Sansa, perhaps because no one truly knew where the younger daughter was. Sansa's precarious position in King's Landing remained a torment for Ned. He could not bear to imagine what she suffered under the Lannisters. Each day he felt the hollowness of his resurrected life sharpen, fueling his desire to act. Yet he had no standing army to march south. Winterfell's garrison was small, its resources depleted by the war. Melisandre cautioned him against riding off blindly. Lawler has returned you for a purpose, she reminded him. That purpose will not be served if you throw your life away in a reckless charge. Ned, though, was not a man who wished to cower behind walls. He considered traveling alone or with a small group to the Riverlands to reunite with Robb. But then another possibility tugged at him, the Wall. Ancient vows whispered in the back of his mind, the knowledge that if the tales were true, the real threat lay beyond the Wall. He wrestled with these conflicting calls of duty. The deciding sign came in a way he had not anticipated. One night, Ned was awakened in his chambers by a strange sensation, a chill that prickled his skin and made his breath catch. He rose, wrapping himself in a cloak, and left the room. The corridors were silent except for the whisper of the wind through arrow slits. Drawn by an impulse he could not name, Ned made his way again to the godwood, passing beneath the tangled canopy of ancient trees until he stood before the heart tree's pale trunk. The face carved into it seemed more animated than before, as though the weirwood had come awake. He sank to his knees, whispering the names of his children as a prayer, yearning for guidance. He felt, or imagined he felt, a presence brush against his mind. A swirl of images flickered, the wall, great and foreboding, dire wolves howling in the night, Jon Snow's face etched in worry and determination, an army of icy whites marching under a starless sky. Then it was gone. The sense of presence faded, leaving Ned trembling, uncertain. But the message felt clear, the true battle was in the north, the line between life and the darkness beyond. Jon was on the wall, presumably still in the Night's Watch. The threat from the others loomed. Ned could not ignore this. He emerged from the godwood at dawn, resolved. Melisandre, who seemed to appear when least expected, was waiting near the exit. She studied him with quiet intensity. You have felt it, she said, not needing to ask what. The north calls. The Lord of Light shows us images in the flames, but the old gods also whisper. The end is coming. Ned nodded. I must go to the wall. My son Jon is there. And if what you say is true, if these White Walkers are stirring, then the Watch needs every sword it can gather, even one such as mine. He paused, brow furrowing. But I cannot ignore my other children. Sansa is still in King's Landing, a hostage of the Lannisters, and Arya is missing. The living must stand together against the darkness, Melisandre replied. If we fail in the north, it will not matter who sits the Iron Throne or who is held captive. All will fall. Come the new dawn, only ashes would remain. Though her words were grim, Ned could not deny their weight. He had lived his life by a code of honor, but also by a practical sense of duty. The living realm was imperiled. If the north fell, if the realm succumbed to the others, then even if he saved Sansa, she would be swallowed by a greater doom. He made his decision. He would ride for the wall, summon what support he could, and prepare for the threat looming beyond. Perhaps after that there would be a chance to free his daughter and find Arya. As for Robb, the king in the north, Ned's hope was that once Robb learned of his father's return, miraculous as it was, he would send aid. But Ned knew also that many would not believe. Already, letters had been dispatched from Winterfell to Riverrun and to Robb's encampments, bearing an account of what had transpired, but ravens could be intercepted, and even if they arrived, the news would be met with disbelief or shock. The war might overshadow the more distant threat from the wall. Ned recalled how he, too, had once doubted or dismissed such tales as no more than legends. But he had seen the flames and glimpsed something in the weirwood's gaze. He could no longer cling to innocence. Before leaving Winterfell, Ned took a final walk through its halls. He passed the training yard where he had once watched Robb and Jon spar with wooden swords. He touched the seat in the great hall where he had presided over harvest feasts. Everywhere he saw echoes of the life he had led, the life that had been cut short. People in the corridors bowed their heads in respect, though some could not hide a fearful curiosity. Whispers of Lord Stark returned from the grave followed him, but he did not chastise them. Let them talk. Perhaps the rumor would lend his warnings more weight when the time came. Preparations for the journey took little time, for their company was small. Ser Roderick, though torn by his loyalty to Winterfell, insisted on accompanying Ned. Maester Luwin, his heart heavy, could not leave the castle, for his duties bound him here and his health was failing. He gave Ned a pouch of herbs and some learned advice. Ned thanked him and clasped his hand in farewell. They embraced as father and son might, tears glimmering in Luwin's eyes. Then Ned turned away, burying his own grief. Winterfell was his home, but destiny, or something like it, called him beyond its walls once again. So it was that a modest band set forth from Winterfell, Ned Stark, the resurrected Lord, Melisandre of Ass High, Ser Roderick Castle, a handful of Winterfell soldiers, and 2 of Melisandre's acolytes. Their banner was the dire wolf of House Stark, though they kept it furled much of the time to avoid drawing attention. The air grew colder as they rode north. The ground, once dotted with autumn leaves, turned white with morning frost. In the distance, they saw the shapes of mountains rising like silent sentinels. Ned felt a sense of grim anticipation stirring within. One afternoon, as they paused to rest the horses by a slow-running stream, Ser Roderick approached Ned, gaze filled with concern. "My lord," he began, "forgive me if I overstep, but I must ask. How do you feel?" He glanced away as though the question itself were improper. "You do not tire as you once did." Ned considered this. He had noticed as well. Though he felt a persistent chill in his bones, he seldom felt hunger or the weariness that once plagued him on long rides. His wounds healed quickly from minor scrapes and bruises. He no longer ached in the knees after hours in the saddle. "Changed" was all he could say at first. Then he added, "I feel as though a part of me remains in shadow, as if I walk in the world but am not fully of it." Ser Roderick lowered his voice. "Do you trust her? The Red Priestess?" Ned looked toward Melisandre, who stood apart, arms folded, face turned toward the distant horizon. "I trust she believes what she says about the threat in the north," he replied slowly. As for the rest, he shook his head. "I do not trust easily, especially after all that has happened. But she has done me no harm beyond bringing me back." His tone carried a note of dark humor that did not suit him. Ser Roderick nodded gravely. "I only hope we do not pay some greater price in the end." When they reached the new gift, the farmland granted to the Night's Watch long ago, they found it sparsely populated, battered by raids from wildlings. The people they encountered were gaunt, frightened, and spoke of vicious skirmishes with raiders from beyond the wall. They warned that more and more wildlings were fleeing south, driven by some terror they would not name. Ned's dread grew. He recalled Arthur and Jafer Flowers, rangers who had turned into undead things. He remembered the words of the deserter he had executed in the first days of the story, back when he was alive and had not the faintest dream of what awaited him. Then he had dismissed the man's ravings as madness. Now he felt their resonance. At last, the wall came into sight, a vast, glimmering barrier of ice that loomed over the landscape. Ned felt a pang of nostalgia and foreboding. He recalled standing atop it with King Robert, showing him the might of the Night's Watch. That had been a lifetime ago. Now, as they drew closer, torches flickered along the ramparts. Watchmen peered down from above. The black gate of Castle Black stood open a crack. Ned breathed a shaky sigh, wondering what welcome he would receive from the watch and from his son, Jon Snow, if Jon was still there. He crossed the threshold with measured steps, Ser Roderick at his side, Melisandre behind him. The courtyard was quiet. Ravens perched on rafters, cawing occasionally as black brothers in worn cloaks hurried about their chores. At first, no one recognized Ned. But then a cry went up from a man near the armory, "Seven, save us, it's Lord Eddard Stark." Confusion rippled through the ranks. Some men stood frozen in place, tools slipping from their hands. Others whispered urgent prayers to the Seven or the old gods. A voice barked an order, and a cluster of armed men approached, led by a stern, square-jawed ranger. He halted before Ned, eyes flicking with disbelief. "You were Lord Stark's face," the ranger said, voice laden with suspicion. "And yet we heard you were dead." "I was," Ned replied quietly, "but death has been undone." Then he looked about, searching for a familiar face, one face in particular. "Where's Lord Commander Mormont? Or where's Jon Snow?" The ranger blinked. "Lord Commander Mormont is gone north of the wall on a great ranging," he said. "Jon Snow is with him. They left many days ago." Ned's heart sank. If Jon was beyond the wall, he might already be in danger. The others lurked there, as did countless other threats. Ned's arrival was too late to warn him. All the urgency that had driven him here felt sharpened to a razor's edge. He turned to Melisandre, who had drawn her hood over her fiery hair. She said nothing, only nodded slightly, as though the next step was inevitable. The Black brothers were torn between awe and alarm, but eventually they guided Ned, Ser Roderick, and Melisandre to the common hall, offering food and warmth. Ned could see the fear in their eyes, for the rumors of White Walkers had reached them, and the abrupt appearance of a lord rumored to be dead was another omen of dark times. Over a meager meal, Ned told them a portion of his story, that Melisandre had resurrected him, that the war in the south was overshadowed by a greater threat beyond the wall. The men listened with grim faces. They confirmed that the wildlings were massing under a king of their own, Mance Rayder, and that the Lord Commander intended to learn more of their plans. But news from beyond the wall was scarce, and the watch's numbers were pitiful compared to what they might face. Ned felt the hopelessness in the air, the weariness. This was what he had come to fight, yet he had no plan, no grand army. All he had was a terrible knowledge that the dead could rise and that an ancient evil stirred in the cold. He remembered the words he had read in old books, the fragments of lore about the long night. Fire and steel must stand against the cold darkness. Looking at Melisandre, he wondered if perhaps that was why Lawler had a foothold here, because winter's shadow grew. He stood, addressing the gathered Black brothers. "I was once Ned Stark, Warden of the North," he began, voice quiet but firm. "I have been given a second life by red sorcery or by the will of gods. Truth be told, I do not fully understand it. But I know this, our realm is in peril. The dead will walk if we do nothing. I ask you to stand as you always have against what comes from the far north." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I will help in what way I can, though I am but a single man. My son is out there with Lord Commander Mormont. We must find them, and we must prepare this wall for the war that will come." Silence gripped the hall. The Black brothers exchanged glances. Some were clearly shaken. Others seemed doubtful or troubled. One veteran spoke up, voice heavy with fatigue, my lord, if that is truly you, what can we do that we have not already done? Our numbers dwindle. The great lords of the 7 kingdoms are too busy warring amongst themselves to send help. Our pleas have gone unanswered. There is only so much we can do, battered as we are." Ned nodded grimly. "I understand, but the realm cannot ignore the threat forever. I will send ravens, urging my son Robb, king in the north, to heed the danger. And if it is in my power, I will ride beyond the wall to help the Lord Commander. We must unite, or we will fall." A hush followed, but slowly some heads began to nod. The Black brothers had no better plan, and at least Ned Stark had always been a name they trusted. That trust, and the faint sliver of hope he carried, even in this unnatural form, might rally them. Melisandre then spoke, quietly but with conviction. She said that the Lord of Light's flames had shown her a vision of victory, but only if the living stood as one. Some men muttered about red gods and foreign priests, but the yearning for any ray of hope stilled their objections. Thus, they gathered in Castle Black to plan. Ned took up a sparse chamber, once used by an officer who had fallen in arranging. He found no comfort in the thin mattress or the cold stone walls, but he did not need comfort. He found himself gazing over old maps of the lands beyond the wall, listening intently to rangers who had ventured there and returned. He learned of Craster's Keep, where a foul man offered shelter at a price, of the haunted forest of Frostfangs, and of the wildling encampments rumored to be mustering. With each scrap of information, Ned's worry for Jon grew. If Jon confronted these threats unprepared, if the others were truly on the march, how could any small band of Black brothers survive? During a lull in the discussions, Ned sat near one of the great fireplaces, warming his hands though he seldom felt true warmth. Melisandre approached him. "You will venture beyond the wall," she said, not a question but a statement. "Yes," Ned replied. "If the Lord Commander and Jon Snow are out there, I must find them. And if the White Walkers stir, we cannot simply wait." She nodded. "I will go with you. There is power in the cold wastes, power that must be met with fire." Ned exhaled a breath that half-fogged in the chilly air. "I welcome any help," he said, "though I fear what we may find." Her lips curved in a slight smile, though her eyes remained sober. Fear is the companion of all who live in these times. But Lawler's flame burns in the darkness. It will guide us if we let it. He rose, looking at her with guarded respect. "Then let us hope your God shows mercy on us all." And so the days passed in preparation. Ravens flew from Castle Black, carrying Ned's personal letters to Robb at River Run, to King's Landing for Sansa's sake, though who knew if they would ever be read, and to Stannis Baratheon, the self-proclaimed king who also had Melisandre's ear. The watchers on the wall eyed the forests below, scanning for sign of movement. A tension built in the air, a sense that something was about to break. At last, the morning came when Ned Stark and Melisandre, along with Ser Roderick and a company of Black brothers, rode out from Castle Black. They passed through the gate, beneath the mammoth shadow of the wall, and emerged into the vast, untamed lands beyond. The wind bit with ferocity, blowing across fields of frozen tundra. The sky overhead was a leaden gray, promising snow. Ahead lay a wilderness haunted by myths and horrors. But Ned pressed on, remembering who he was, a Stark of Winterfell, a man who had once believed in duty, honor, and family above all else. Now resurrected, he carried the weight of a destiny he had never asked for. He thought of his children, Robb, Sansa, Arya, Bran, Rickon, and Jon, and he would face any darkness if it meant a chance to protect them. They rode into the swirling gloom, and the wall shrank behind them until it was a pale line on the horizon. With every step north, the cold grew deeper, creeping under their cloaks, numbing their extremities. Melisandre did not seem bothered by the cold, her breath curling into the air with each exhale, but her expression composed. Sometimes, when night fell, she lit torches that burned redder and brighter than normal flame, as though fed by some secret power. The Black brothers gave her a wide berth, suspicious yet uneasy in her presence. Ser Rodrik stayed close to Ned, though Ned could see the worry etched in the older knight's eyes. Days turned to nights, nights stretched into a restless pattern of watchfulness. Strange calls echoed from distant hills, reminding them they were in wildling territory, or worse. Once, they found tracks in the snow, footprints half-shuffled, pointing in many directions, impossible to identify clearly. Some swore they saw ice-blue eyes peering at them from the edge of a dark wood, but when they investigated, the place was empty, save for a lingering chill. Eventually, they encountered small pockets of wildlings, ragged, frightened groups who fled at the sight of armed men. One man, desperate and half-starved, fell to his knees and begged for mercy. He spat out stories of walking corpses that descended upon their camp in the night, slaughtering whole families, leaving only the echoes of screams. His eyes were wild with terror. Ned listened grimly, shared what little food they could spare, and urged the man to return south, telling him the Night's Watch would shelter him. Whether the man believed him or not was unclear, but Ned could offer no better option. Through snowdrifts and across frozen rivers they trudged. Their horses began to struggle and the men grew weary of the unrelenting cold. Yet Ned pressed on, guided by fleeting rumors of the Lord Commander's route. The rangers he traveled with were tough, but even they felt uneasy, as though the land itself watched them. The unnatural hush weighed on them each dusk. Melisandre's presence was both comfort and concern. She radiated an aura of heat that sometimes eased the bitter cold, yet her eyes always seemed focused on something beyond mortal sight. One twilight, as they made camp in a ring of ancient trees with bark as white as bone, Ned slipped away from the group to gather his thoughts. He stood on a small rise, gazing out at a vast expanse of snow-draped plains and dark forest beyond. The sky was stained with the dying light of day. He wondered if this was how it felt for the kings of winter in ancient times, alone in the icy realm, guardians of a frontier none else understood. He bowed his head, letting the wind tousle the strands of his hair. A memory of his children's laughter in Winterfell's courtyard fluttered into his mind, bittersweet. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Melisandre. She came to stand beside him. "You feel it," she said softly, "the heaviness in the air. The darkness stirs." Ned nodded. "I do." She looked east, where a faint red glow might have been the last vestige of sunset. "When the dawn breaks, it will do so after the blackest night. If we cannot hold back the great other, dawn may never come." Ned's voice was thick with determination. "We will hold," he said, "or die trying." Melisandre's gaze lingered on him, and for a moment her usual composure softened. She looked almost human, almost vulnerable. "You have lost so much, Eddard Stark, and yet you stand. That is why Lawler chose you, I think. Honor can be a sword that cuts both ways, but in this war, it is needed." Ned was silent, remembering the betrayal that led to his death, the lies he had been forced to tell to protect his daughters. Honor had led him to a headsman's block. Yet in a world tumbling into chaos, perhaps honor was the only anchor he had left. Night fell and they huddled around the campfire. Melisandre murmured a prayer to her red god, the fire flaring momentarily brighter. Ser Rodrik eyed the flame warily, as did the Black brothers. Ned simply stared into it, glimpsing maybe shadowy figures drifting through snow. He closed his eyes, uncertain if it was merely his imagination. They pressed on for another day and then another. The cold deepened. Sleet and snow battered them. The wind howled like a living thing. Then, on the morning of the third day, they crested a ridge and saw smoke rising from a valley below. They hurried forward, hearts pounding. In the valley, they found a half-destroyed encampment of the Night's Watch, tents torn, fires long cold, bodies strewn about. Ned dismounted, his boots crunching on blood-tinged snow. The Black brothers with him rushed forward, calling out names. No living souls answered. This was the aftermath of slaughter. Ned knelt beside one of the bodies, turning it gently. The man's eyes were open, frozen in terror, pupils clouded over. His hands were curled as if he had fought something inhuman. Melisandre approached, her face grim. "The work of the undead," she said quietly, placing a hand over the man's chest. "There is no warmth left. The shadows have passed here." A ragged cry came from one of the rangers. He had discovered a survivor, barely alive, huddled behind a torn tent. The man's breath rattled as he clung to life. They gathered around him. His cloak was soaked in blood. His eyes were vacant, but at the sight of Ned, some awareness flickered. He choked out words, coughing up crimson. "They came, in the night. Dead men, blue eyes. I saw the old bear. G or Mormont. He tried to hold them off, but he trailed off, struggling for air. Some men fled. I couldn't run. Ned bent closer. Lord Commander Mormont, did he survive? The dying man shook his head faintly. Tears froze on his cheeks. No. I saw him fall. They tore at him, another hacking cough. Your boy, your son. Jon Snow, he led a group away, tried to draw them off. Maybe he got away. He shuddered. God save us all. His eyes rolled back, and with a final gasp, he was gone. The Black brothers hung their heads in despair. Some muttered prayers. Others wept openly. Ned's face went pale, a flood of anguish rushing through him at the thought of Mormont's death, of the men slaughtered here, and at the possibility that Jon still lived somewhere out in this frozen wasteland, pursued by the dead. A fierce resolve seized Ned's heart. He would not abandon his son. If there was a chance Jon lived, he would find him. They dug shallow graves where they could, though the frozen earth defied their efforts. Melisandre stood watch, eyes scanning the distance, no doubt wary that the killers might return. Ned felt the toll of sorrow as they heaped snow over the bodies, each man receiving a brief prayer. Then, with heavy hearts, they remounted. The tracks leading away from the camp were muddled, but they found a trail of footprints heading east. The rangers guessed a group of survivors might have fled that way. Ned led them in pursuit, hope flickering in his chest despite the horror they had seen. For days they followed the trail, pushing themselves and the horses to exhaustion. They encountered more abandoned camps, more signs of struggle. Always a sense that they were on the heels of something dreadful. At night, the howls of distant wolves, or worse, echoed under the moon. The Black brothers whispered of whites that never tired, hunting them in the dark. Ser Roderick's expression grew graver with each passing league. Melisandre would sometimes stop and raise a torch, chanting in a low voice. She claimed she could sense the presence of shadows, but they were scattered, moving unpredictably. Then, one evening, they came upon a ravine where the trail ended abruptly. Searching the edges, they discovered a gap in the rocky wall, partially hidden by snow and branches. Venturing inside, they found a cavern where a small band of Black brothers huddled in the dark, half dead from cold and hunger. Among them, his face gaunt but alive, was Jon Snow. Ned rushed forward, heart swelling with relief and disbelief. Jon rose, eyes wide, hair a tangled mess, a shallow cut across his cheek. For a moment, father and son simply stared at each other, as though each saw a ghost. Then Ned clasped Jon by the shoulders. Neither could speak. Jon's lips trembled, his eyes brimming with confusion and unspoken emotion. He had never expected to see his father again, certainly not here, in this icy wilderness, not after hearing of his death in King's Landing. And Ned, for his part, felt warmth in his chest that reminded him he was still human. He found the words at last. Jon, he managed hoarsely, you live? Jon breathed, father, how he broke off, shaking his head in disbelief. You were. I heard you were executed. I was, Ned admitted softly. But I stand here before you. The gods, or perhaps other powers, saw fit to return me. Jon looked stunned, his confusion mirrored by the ragged survivors around him. Melisandre entered behind Ned, her torch casting flickering light on the cave walls. The Black brothers recoiled slightly at the sight of the Red Priestess, but they were too exhausted and beaten to challenge her. Jon sank onto a rock, running a shaky hand through his hair. The Lord Commander, Jon's voice broke. He fell. The whites overwhelmed us. Some of us managed to escape, but we lost so many. We've been hiding here, trying to survive. Ned knelt next to him, seeing the pain etched in Jon's face. We know, Ned said gently. We found the camp. He closed his eyes briefly. I'm sorry, Jon. Jon swallowed hard, trying to regain composure. He glanced at Melisandre, then back at Ned. Is this truly real? Or am I dreaming? Ned reached for his hand, gripping it firmly. The warmth of living flesh met Jon's cold skin. It's real, Ned said. I will explain everything when we are safer. For now, we need to get you and your men back to Castle Black. Jon's shoulders sagged, relief mingling with grief. He nodded. Aye, we have to warn them. They're stronger than we thought. The whites, the White Walkers, it's all true. Ned helped Jon to his feet, supporting him. Melisandre lit the way as they guided the survivors out of the cavern into the frigid night. Snow began to fall, thick flakes swirling around them as though the sky wept for all the blood spilled. The group mustered what little strength they had left and began the long journey back to the wall, back to the last bastion of the living, carrying the knowledge of horrors that lurked just beyond. For Ned, it was a moment of bittersweet triumph. He had saved Jon, the child he had raised as his own, the boy who still wrestled with the question of his mother's identity and his place in the world. For Jon, seeing his father alive was a shock to the core. Yet they had no chance to dwell on the emotions swirling in their chests, for their footsteps led them through deepening snow toward a war that would test the resolve of the realm. The future was shadowed by dark wings, dark words. But Ned Stark, once dead, now lived, and with him came a flicker of hope. Whether that hope was enough to stave off the endless night remained to be seen, for the cold winds were rising and winter's teeth would tear at them all before the end. They set out from the cave at first light, the snow swirling in half-frozen gusts around them, the sky an unbroken slate of gray. Ned supported Jon Snow, helping him mount a half-lame horse that one of the Black brothers had managed to keep alive. The rest of Jon's surviving companions, 5 men, all hollow-cheeked and weary, followed on foot or shared saddles as best they could. Ser Rodrik rode near the front, scanning the terrain for any sign of further danger, his breath smoking in the cold air. Melisandre hovered at the rear, her unnatural warmth seemingly unbothered by the biting wind. Every time Ned glanced back, he saw her cloak shifting in the gusts, her gaze focused and vigilant as if she aged. Alf expected something monstrous to leap from the distant tree line. They chose a course that would take them along the known trails used by rangers of the Night's Watch, though known was relative. The shifting snows and sudden squalls could erase footprints in moments, turning the wild landscape into a white labyrinth. The Black brothers who had survived the attack described whites that did not feel hunger or weariness, pale silhouettes stumbling through the dark with eyes burning blue. There were even rumors, though none could confirm it, of white walkers themselves, tall and lithe, armored in ice, brandishing swords of frost. Jon's voice trembled when he recounted how he had glimpsed something in the distance, a shape that shimmered like glass in moonlight. He couldn't be certain if his eyes had played tricks on him. Ned believed him anyway. He had learned enough of the world's horrors to know that sometimes the old stories told truths. Each day, they marched through drifts that rose to their knees, forging onward until their bodies shook with exhaustion. The horses fared no better, struggling through half-frozen streams and buried trails. They had little choice but to press on, for the nights brought cruel temperatures that would kill any man caught unprotected. On that first evening of the journey back, they found a copse of twisted pines where the wind was somewhat gentler. There, they made camp, building their fires high and huddling close. Ned and Jon sat together, father and son reunited under circumstances that neither had ever imagined. Jon had trouble meeting Ned's eyes, as if fearing that this was all a dream that might vanish with the first rays of morning. At last, he gathered the courage to speak. "I prayed for your mercy in King's Landing. I thought if the gods had any justice, they'd spare you at the last moment, but then the news came that Joffrey," he swallowed, eyes bright with unshed tears. "When I heard, I lost all hope." Ned put a hand on Jon's arm, the weight of so many unspoken things pressing upon them. "I never wanted you to learn of my fate that way," he said, voice low. "I did what I thought was best to protect my daughters, but I was a fool. If I had stood my ground more wisely—" "You're not to blame," Jon interrupted, his voice rough. "You tried to do what was right, always." Then his gaze flickered toward the red glow of Melisandre's fire on the other side of the camp. She was chanting under her breath, the flames leaping unnaturally high. "I don't understand how you're here. They say she brought you back. Is it true?" Ned nodded. He felt the phantom ache around his neck. "I wish I had clearer answers. I was dead, Jon, truly dead. I only remember darkness. Then I returned. Melisandre wove her sorcery. She says the Lord of Light has plans for me. Perhaps he does. But I am still Ned Stark, and you are my son, and I will do what I must to keep you safe, if I can." Jon lowered his eyes, troubled. "I'm grateful you're here, but the men, they whisper. The Watch has its own superstitions. Some wonder if you're a white yourself or some shadow-bound puppet." Ned exhaled a faint cloud of warmth. "Let them wonder. If I have to prove my loyalty by standing against the threat beyond the wall, so be it. We will face it together." They said little more that night, each man lost in his own thoughts as the fire crackled. Far away, a wolf howled, or perhaps it was a wind keening through the pines. The cold seeped through every layer of clothing until fingers went numb and lips turned blue. Only Melisandre remained strangely unaffected. Now and then Ned thought he saw her breathe out puffs of red-tinted air, but perhaps that was merely an illusion of the firelight. Whatever her secrets, she had indeed done something beyond mortal ken. Over the next 4 days, they edged south, the terrain gradually leveling into rolling plains dusted with snow. The deeper they went, the more they found signs of old ranger camps. Tattered tents, scattered ashes, broken spears. They encountered a single, haggard wildling woman who had hunkered in the lee of a boulder for warmth, half-frozen. She stared at them with hollow eyes, too weak to flee. Ned offered her a bit of bread, which she devoured. In a trembling voice, she said she had seen the dead moving by moonlight, saw them take her kin. She fled, alone, certain her gods had abandoned her. Ned tried to coax more information from her, but all she could do was mutter, "They're coming. They're coming." Then she curled into herself as though lost in her own nightmares. They left her with a blanket and a bit of food, urging her to seek refuge at Castle Black if she could walk. Whether she had the strength remained to be seen. The further south they traveled, the more urgent the sense of dread became. Melisandre claimed she glimpsed shapes in the flicker of torches each night, silhouettes that prowled the edges of darkness. Some of the Night's Watch survivors gritted their teeth in silent fear. Jon asked his father if they should consider pushing on through the night. Ned saw the lines of exhaustion etched into each man's face, the trembling hands. "No," he decided. "We'll kill ourselves and the horses trying to outrun shadows. We keep to a steady pace. We watch each other's backs." They formed a tighter formation as they walked, posted sentries around each camp, and listened to every rustle in the thickets. Jon kept his sword close, that bastard sword Ned had once gifted him. The same weapon that had accompanied him to the wall and beyond. Its edges were chipped now, scratched by countless skirmishes. When Ned asked about that, Jon recounted the battles with wildlings who had tried to steal what little the Watch possessed, the skirmishes with whites that defied all reason and had to be hacked apart until they stopped moving. Ned listened gravely, his stomach twisting at the knowledge of just how real the threat was. He realized that while he had been gone, truly gone, Jon had grown from a boy into a man tempered by death and hardship. On the 5th day, they glimpsed the wall on the horizon, a streak of pale blue glinting in the morning sun. Relief spread through the group, though it was tempered by the memory of the empty camps they'd passed and the dread of the future. If the dead could tear apart an entire ranging led by Lord Commander Mormont, then Castle Black might stand as a bastion, but only for a time. The tension among the company eased just a little when they reached the winding path that led to the gates, Black brothers on the ramparts calling out in surprise to see Ned Stark and Jon Snow among the returnees. The gates groaned open, letting them inside. Castle Black was abuzz with rumor, for many had doubted Ned Stark's reappearance. Now, seeing him ride in with the survivors, even the most skeptical Black brothers had to accept the truth. The yard filled with watchers who craned their necks, murmuring to one another in hushed voices. He was dead. The Red Woman's magic. He looks the same. Gods, he looks half-ghost. But none dared raise a blade against Ned, not when Jon Snow rode at his side, for Jon had earned a measure of respect from those who had served with him. The acting commander, a humorless man named Ser Jeremy Ricker, greeted them with stoic gratitude, though he eyed Melisandre warily. "Lord Stark," he addressed Ned formally, "you do Castle Black a great service bringing our brothers home." He glanced at Jon. "I'm glad to see you alive, Snow." A moment later, his expression darkened. "But the news you bring is grim indeed. The Lord Commander, gone." Jon's voice was thick with emotion. "He fell protecting us. We had no time to bury him. The dead overwhelmed the camp." He saw the sorrow in Ricker's face. All present knew that Jeor Mormont had been more than a leader. He was the anchor of the Watch's dwindling hope. With the old bear gone, the Watch was truly rudderless. They gathered in the common hall soon after, a great wooden structure heated by a central fireplace that sputtered and crackled. The Black brothers who still remained at Castle Black, perhaps 100 in number, assembled as well, the hush of their presence underscoring how few they were. The ravages of war and the harshness of the far north had whittled away at their ranks. Even more had perished beyond the wall. Standing at the front, Ned surveyed their worn faces, feeling the weight of their despair. He'd known the Watch was a shadow of what it once was, but the scale of their losses was shocking. Ser Jeremy addressed them all. "We have lost a commander who guided us with wisdom and valor," he began, voice unsteady. "We have lost many brothers, but the threat beyond the wall has not lessened. If anything, it grows. We must choose a new Lord Commander, we must reorganize, we must." His words were cut off by one of the Black brothers shouting from the back. "We need the North's help. All the North's help." Another man called, "There's no time for ceremony. Winter is nearly upon us." Voices broke into a clamor, men venting their rage and panic. The hall filled with heated voices. Ned raised a hand, and though he bore no rank in the Watch, the starkness of his presence, his being not quite living as they understood it, commanded attention. The hall fell silent. "I understand your fear," Ned said quietly, letting his voice carry. "I have seen what lies beyond. I know how dire it is, but we cannot allow panic to rule us." He glanced around the faces, black hoods and tired eyes. "I wrote to my son, King Robb Stark, before I journeyed north. He must know by now that I have returned and that Castle Black needs men, supplies, and loyalty. He took a moment, gathering his thoughts. Our enemies are not only the wildlings but the White Walkers, and they bring dead things to life in their wake. That is who we truly face. Do not doubt it. The war of the Five Kings must pale before this threat, or the living will all perish together. Quiet fell. Even those who disbelieved in White Walkers or dreaded the idea of relying on Southern armies sensed the conviction in Ned's voice. When he continued, his words carried the authority of a man who had once been Warden of the North, a man resurrected by a power beyond mortal laws. I can't promise reinforcements will arrive soon enough, but we must rally what strength we have, build our defenses, repair our keeps if we can, scout the wildling movements. Above all, watch for signs of the Whites and the others. We must hold the wall. Jon studied his father with both admiration and sorrow. This was Ned Stark as he had always remembered him. Calm, determined, a leader. But something else lurked beneath the surface now, a haunted quality that made him appear older than his years, older even than the day he lost his life. Some intangible weight clung to him. Still, in that moment, seeing the gathered men find direction in Ned's words, Jon felt a flicker of pride and hope. They spent the next days reorganizing. Ser Jeremy Ricker, as acting commander, conferred privately with Ned, Jon, and several senior rangers. The greatest immediate task was to patrol the wall's length, for the wildlings were said to be gathering in huge numbers. Tormund Giantsbane and Mance Rayder had led the free folk southward, seeking refuge from the White Walkers that threatened to overwhelm the Watch's ability to guard the gates. Meanwhile, more urgent was the question of election. A new Lord Commander had to be chosen. Some men quietly murmured that Jon Snow should be considered. He was a capable ranger, and the old bear had held him in high regard. Others whispered of more experienced veterans. For the moment, no one was prepared to cast votes. They were simply too shaken by the losses. Ned remained an outsider in the politics of the Night's Watch, for he was not a brother himself. Yet his influence was undeniable. Men listened when he spoke. They revered him with an intensity that bordered on awe, for rumor whispered that his eyes glowed faintly in firelight or that the shadows around him moved on their own. Ned felt uncomfortable with such reverence. He wanted only to do his duty, protect the realm, protect his children, and stand against the threats to come. In the quiet hours, Ned often found himself in the courtyard, gazing up at the wall. The immense sheet of ice was an ever-present reminder that they stood at the threshold between life and a frozen oblivion. He wondered if, in his previous life, he had underestimated just how fragile that barrier was. Sometimes Jon joined him, and they spoke of old times in Winterfell, of Bran's climbing, of Arya's tomboy scrapes, of Robb's pride, and of Little Rickon trailing after them all. The mention of Sansa made them both fall silent, for they knew she was captive in King's Landing. Ned's guilt flared at that. He had done nothing yet to free her. But how could he? The war in the south was beyond his reach. All that was in front of him now was the gathering darkness of winter. On the 6th evening after their return, as the wind beat against the old wooden structures of Castle Black, a raven arrived from the south, one of the birds Ned had sent. It bore a message from Robb Stark. Maester Mullen, the Watch's ranking maester, brought the letter to Ned's chamber. There, by the light of a single candle, Ned read his son's words, scrawled in a hurried, tense hand. "Father, your letter came at last. The news within is beyond belief, but I will not dismiss a miracle when all else is so dark. If it is truly you, then the gods are more mysterious than we ever imagined. We have fought many battles in the Riverlands. The war goes poorly in some respects, better in others. King Joffrey holds Sansa as a hostage still. Mother has tried to negotiate her release, but to no avail. Arya is missing, though some say she might be hiding somewhere in the Riverlands. Bran and Rickon vanished from Winterfell after Theon's treachery. Some claim they are dead, others that they were taken by a bastard of the Dreffort. We have no certain tidings. Our family is scattered like leaves in an autumn storm. As for the threat beyond the wall, I have heard the tales. I want to believe you, and yet these are tidings that stretch credulity. Still, you are my father, and if you warn of the danger, I will heed it. I cannot march the entire northern host to the wall, not while the Lannisters and the Freys menace our rear, but I will send what men I can spare. The North will not abandon its duty. I only beg that you remain safe if you are truly alive. Send me further word, and I will do all in my power to support Castle Black. Let the realm see that House Stark stands as it always has. Your son, Robb Stark, king in the north. Ned held the parchment in trembling hands. So many lines jumped out at him. Sansa still captive, Arya missing, Bran and Rickon vanished, Theon's betrayal, each cut deeper than any blade. He realized then that returning from death did not spare him from the heartbreak of a father's nightmares. Yet Robb's vow to send men was a sliver of hope. Perhaps, with enough forces, the wall could stand against the horrors to come. He showed the letter to Jon, who read it by the flickering candlelight, his expression growing somber. "Your daughters," Jon murmured. "My sisters, if I weren't bound by my vows. You are my son," Ned cut in gently, "and you have already done more than many men would. The vow you swore to the Night's Watch weighs heavily, I know, but I do not wish you to forsake it. The realm needs you here, as do I." A pang of guilt crossed Ned's face. "I wish I could ride south to rescue them myself, Jon, but if I've learned anything, it's that we must stand where we are needed most. Right now, the greatest threat is beyond the wall." Jon nodded slowly, though Ned could tell the young man's heart was torn. He had loved his sisters, especially Arya, who was closest to him in spirit. Still, Ned's words held truth. A war of unimaginable scale loomed in the north. The realm could ill afford to lose defenders here. Word of Robb's promise spread through Castle Black, lifting spirits somewhat. Men of the Watch muttered that a token force from the north might arrive, though no one knew how many or when. Meanwhile, the day-to-day tasks of fortifying the castle continued. The Black brothers set about repairing broken sections of the outer walls, reinforcing gatehouses, stocking up on provisions for a long winter. Ned lent his authority to galvanize them, while Melisandre often stood near the ramparts at dusk, eyes scanning the horizon as though expecting to see an army of the dead marching out of the gloom. The nights grew darker, the cold more intense. Thick clouds of gray smothered the sky, burying the sun in gloom for days at a time. Maester Mullen predicted that the true onset of winter was imminent. Fires had to be fed constantly. Horses whinnied and stomped in the stables, sensing the rising tension. Scouts who ventured beyond the wall returned with grim news. Large wildling encampments spotted near the Milkwater, rumors of entire villages swallowed by whites, twisted footprints in the snow that vanished as if swallowed by the wind. Each tale drove home that time was running short. Late one evening, as Ned walked through a dim corridor, a Black brother came hurrying after him, face pale. "My lord," the man rasped, "the Red Woman wants you in the courtyard." Concern flared in Ned's chest. He followed without question, emerging into the open air, where a small group of watchers stood around Melisandre. Torches flickered in her hands. She was staring at a broad iron brazier, flames dancing within. When Ned approached, she looked up. Her eyes reflected the firelight like polished garnets. She beckoned him closer and spoke softly, though her voice carried a quiet intensity. "I see movement in the flames, my lord. The shadows stir. I cannot yet tell if they come from beyond the wall or somewhere else. Look with me." Ned, hesitant, peered into the brazier. At first, he saw only orange tongues of flame, the glow searing his vision. Then shapes began to dance, wisps of smoke forming fleeting silhouettes that vanished almost as soon as they appeared. He thought he glimpsed a massive silhouette dragging something across an icy field, a swirl of darkness that might have been the swirling fur of a dire wolf, and a flicker of pale figures with blazing blue eyes. His pulse quickened. The images left him unsettled. Melisandre's voice came in a whisper. "Fire cannot lie, though it can deceive us with half-truths. All I can say is that the White Walkers gather. They sense the gathering of men here at the wall, sense your presence and mine." She turned to look at Ned, her expression grim. "We must be ready." Ned's breath plumed in the cold air. He believed her. He felt it in his bones, that creeping dread he had known since he awakened in that fortress on Dragonstone, half alive. Duty pressed in on him from all sides. He thought of his children scattered across the realm, exposed to countless dangers. And yet, the fate of the kingdom might hinge on what happened at the wall. If the dead swept south, there would be no safe place for any living soul. The next morning brought new stirrings in the courtyard. The Black brothers were abuzz with talk of selecting a new Lord Commander. Some said they needed decisive leadership now, not an endless wait for the senior officers to bicker. Others insisted tradition must be followed, a formal vote. Jon seemed uneasy whenever the topic arose. Rumors abounded that many would nominate him, though he was young and only a steward turned ranger. Still, the men had seen him fight, had witnessed his loyalty and bravery. So, Me also claimed that the old bear himself had spoken favorably of Jon leading one day. For his part, Jon was torn between humility and the knowledge that the Watch had to unify around a single voice. The ghost of Mormont's last stand weighed on them all. In a small council gathered in the Lord Commander's solar, Ned stood alongside Ser Jeremy, Jon, and a few others discussing how to proceed. Ser Jeremy cleared his throat. "We cannot afford a rift in our ranks, not when we face threats from both wildlings and whites. We must settle this swiftly." He paused, his gaze drifting to Jon. "Many of the men look to you, Snow. You have the old bear's sword." He gestured to the blade at Jon's hip, Longclaw, the Valyrian steel weapon Jeor Mormont had gifted him. "They see that as a symbol." Jon reddened, unsure where to rest his eyes. "It was a gift I never imagined." Ned spoke, voice measured. "The Watch must choose its own commander. No one man can impose himself, no matter how worthy. The Black Brothers must vote in the proper way. That is tradition, and tradition is the backbone of this order. If it is Jon they choose, so be it. If it is another, Jon will respect that." He turned to look at his son. "Whatever happens, the Watch needs unity." Jon nodded, accepting the truth of it. Others in the room grunted in agreement. That night, the Black Brothers assembled in the common hall, by the glow of myriad torches, to hold the choosing. Food was scarce, and spirits were nervous, but there was a sense of solemn ceremony to it all. The men scrawled or scratched the names of their preferred candidate onto bits of parchment. These were collected in a battered helm and brought to the dais where Ser Jeremy awaited. Ned stood quietly at the side of the hall, arms folded, observing the process. He saw a swirl of emotions in the Watchers' faces. Some believed it madness to entrust the Watch to a boy of barely 20. Others had fought alongside Jon and held him in high regard. Some might cast their vote for Ser Jeremy, others for veteran rangers. The tension built as the bits of parchment piled up. At last, Ser Jeremy began to count them aloud, his voice echoing in the hush. Names were repeated: Jeremy Ricker, Othel Yarwick, Bowen Marsh, Jon Snow. At the halfway mark, Jon Snow trailed slightly behind Jeremy Ricker, but then the tide shifted. Bit by bit, Jon's name crept ahead. When the final scrap of parchment was read, there was no doubt. Jon Snow had the majority. A stunned hush fell. Jon, standing near the dais, looked almost ill. He had not truly thought they would choose him over older, more seasoned men. But that was the result. Ser Jeremy offered a curt bow, though disappointment flickered across his face. "Lord Commander Snow," he said, voice carrying no rancor, "may you lead us well." Applause broke out, scattered at first, then gathering strength. The Black Brothers chanted Jon's name, but it was subdued, a sign of respect more than celebration, for they all understood the gravity of the times. Jon stepped up to the dais, swallowing hard. His eyes flicked to Ned, who nodded once, silently urging him to accept the burden with dignity. So Jon squared his shoulders, raised his chin, and spoke his first words as Lord Commander. "Brothers, I thank you for your faith in me. I never dreamed I would stand here, but if this is what the Watch requires, I will give it everything I have. We face the greatest danger the world has known in thousands of years. We must be unyielding as the wall itself. You have my vow that I will do all in my power to keep you safe, and to keep the realm safe. I ask only that you stand with me now and always." More applause followed. A sense of relief mingled with a new sense of hope. Ned felt a swirl of pride and sorrow. He could see in Jon's eyes that he might well be ready for this, forced to grow by the cruelties of war. A father could ask for no more in dark times. After, men came forward to clasp Jon's hand in congratulations, though some still wore doubtful frowns. There was no time for celebration or feasting. Everyone understood that the real test lay ahead. Ned and Jon spoke late into the night, sequestered in the old solar. Melisandre was there too, her red cloak drawn close around her slim form, the ruby at her throat pulsing in the glow of lanterns. Jon's expression remained taut. "I don't even know where to begin," he confessed. "We need to secure the Shadow Tower, Eastwatch, and all the castles along the wall, but we barely have enough men for 3 of them, let alone 19. The wildlings mass to the west, the whites rove to the north, and winter is falling on us with all its fury." Ned nodded. "We can't hold every castle, not with your numbers. Choose your positions wisely. Concentrate on Castle Black and the Shadow Tower, perhaps Eastwatch if you can. Fortify your hold on the wall itself. Patrol relentlessly. You can't let wildlings slip through the tunnels unnoticed." Melisandre's voice was calm, almost hypnotic. "The wildlings are not the true enemy, Lord Commander. They flee the Great Other and the White Walkers. In time, you may find that it is better to make common cause with them than face the dead alone." Jon's brow furrowed. "Make peace with Mance Rayder and his host? We have tried that. The old bear believed we might treat with them, but not all in the watch agreed. Now, with the Lord Commander gone, I don't know if the men will stand for it." "You are Lord Commander now," Melisandre reminded him, her tone carrying a slight edge. "If you believe it is right, you must act with your authority. You will face doubt, fear, perhaps even mutiny. But do not let that deter you. The winds of winter blow cold, and soon none shall be spared." Ned watched Jon's reaction. He saw the conflict in the young man's eyes. Indeed, forging an alliance with wildlings was a massive break from tradition, something that would enrage many black brothers. Yet the logic was plain: if the White Walkers slaughtered them all, there would be no point in upholding age-old divisions. Ned interjected softly, "Lawler or no, the Red Woman speaks sense. The free folk are men and women too. They deserve the chance to fight for the living if they choose. But proceed carefully. The Night's Watch must come to this on its own terms." Jon nodded, a heavy sigh escaping his lips. "I will consider it. But first, we must hold what ground we have." In the weeks that followed, Castle Black became a hive of activity. Jon assigned men to scout beyond the wall, to keep watch on the wildling camps, and to watch for signs of white incursions. He dispatched ravens to Eastwatch and the Shadow Tower, calling for cooperation. He struggled through the administrative burdens of his office, aided by men like Ed Tollett, called Dolorous Ed, and other stewards who took on greater responsibilities. All the while, Ned was at his side, advising, cautioning, occasionally stepping aside so that Jon could stand on his own. Ser Roderick drilled recruits in the yard, teaching them the basics of sword and shield, though Ser Roderick himself would occasionally mutter that a single confrontation with an undead foe would teach them more than a month of training. As for Melisandre, she spent much of her time praying in the courtyard or atop the wall itself, her red hair whipping in the winds. Some black brothers feared her, whispering that she might be weaving dark spells. Others respected her for having brought Ned Stark back. Meanwhile, Ned tried not to dwell on the unearthly sensation coursing through him at all hours, a coldness that never fully left his veins, a memory of that deep black void where he had lingered. He had no illusions that he was fully the same man as before. Sometimes, when he closed his eyes at night, all he saw was the headsman's sword and the shock on Sansa's face. He would wake, drenched in a cold sweat, half expecting to find himself alone in some netherworld. Winter's grip tightened. Snow fell in thick drifts, ice forming on the beards of black brothers who patrolled the ramparts. Once or twice, ravens arrived bearing messages from the south. One came from Robb, stating that he was gathering a small force of northern lords willing to head to the wall. Names like the Karstarks and the Umbers were mentioned, though their loyalty had been tested by the war. Another raven brought ill news. Balon Greyjoy had died under suspicious circumstances, and Euron Greyjoy was rumored to be wreaking havoc in the western seas, which meant no help from the Ironborn. Ned felt a pang of guilt for Theon, the ward he had taken in once. That boy had contributed to the collapse of Winterfell in Ned's absence. So many tragedies in the south, so many heartbreaks. They all pressed inward, but Ned had no time to dwell on them. The threat in the north overshadowed all else. Then came the day when Jon's patrols discovered a large wildling party creeping along the edge of the haunted forest, apparently heading for one of the abandoned castles east of Castle Black. The Watchers reported that there were at least 200 of them, men, women, and even a few children, all haggard and desperate. Jon wrestled with the decision of whether to mount an attack or attempt contact. In a tense conference, he sought counsel from Ned, Ser Jeremy, and others. Ser Jeremy pressed for a swift, decisive strike. These wildlings will test our strength. If we do not send them scurrying back north of the wall, they'll whittle at our defenses. Jon's gaze flickered to Ned, who said quietly, they are running from something worse. If we slaughter them, we only feed the ranks of the dead eventually. Better to see if they'll speak. Jon studied Ser Jeremy, then looked around the table. Send a party under a white flag, he decided. Offer them chance to parley. If they come peacefully, we will allow them through the gate under guard. I will meet their leader in the yard. The Black brothers exchanged uncertain glances, but none openly defied Jon in that moment. The plan was set. 2 nights later, the wildlings arrived, drawn by the Watchers waving a banner of truce. Torches cast long shadows across the snow as they led the wildlings into the courtyard. Ned stood among the Watchers, the flaming brands reflecting off his pale features. Jon waited near the gate, flanked by a few trusted men. He'd set archers on the walls, ready to loose arrows if the wildlings proved treacherous. A tall, broad-shouldered man with streaks of gray in his wild, unkempt hair stepped forward, leaning on an axe. "Who's in charge here?" he demanded, glancing around with suspicion. His breath steamed in the frigid air. Jon took a step forward. "I am Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, Jon Snow." Surprise flickered across the wildling's weathered face. "You're but a pup." A mutter ran through the Black brothers. Some reached for their swords, but Jon held up a hand, demanding calm. "You have come a long way," Jon said. "I know why. You fear the White Walkers. You want to get south of the wall." The man spat on the ground, ignoring the circle of archers above. "Aye, we do. The Dead Walk. We want no part of that. But your crows have hunted us, driven us back. Why should we trust you now?" Jon hesitated, then spoke truthfully. "Because we have a common enemy. The others would kill us all, wildling or kneeler. I offer you a chance. Lay down your arms, swear not to harm us, and we will let you pass, even help you find shelter. Refuse, and we will fight, and none of us can afford more bloodshed." Murmurs spread among the wildlings. Many looked half-starved, their eyes flicking toward the gates of Castle Black, the promise of warmth. But others were proud, scowling at the Black brothers. The older man frowned. "We are free folk. We bow to no kneeler's laws." Jon's face hardened. "Bow or not, if you threaten the Watch, we will defend ourselves. But if you come peacefully, we will not turn you away to be slaughtered by the dead." A tense silence followed. Then a woman stepped from the ranks, tall, with braided hair, carrying a spear. "I say we take the boy's offer. We've lost too many and the Whites are close behind us." She stared at the older man, defiance in her gaze. "There's no glory in dying out in the cold." He glowered, but she was not alone. Several wildlings muttered agreement, brandishing ragged weapons but pointing them downward. They had children to worry about, wounded kin, pregnant women. Eventually, the tall man's shoulders slumped. With a resentful grunt, he dropped his axe in the snow. Others followed his lead, the clang of steel echoing in the courtyard. Tension drained from the Watchers above, though no one relaxed fully. In a softer tone, the man said, "Name's Fen. You keep your word, Crow, and we'll keep the peace." Jon nodded, standing straighter. "You have it. We'll arrange lodging. You'll have to follow our rules while you're here. My men will see to that." Thus, the free folk entered Castle Black as uneasy guests rather than prisoners or foes. Archers escorted them to a corner of the courtyard where they could pitch tents or take shelter in old storerooms. Ned watched the procession with a mixture of relief and concern. He remembered old Nan's tales of savage wildlings, and he knew too well that old hatreds did not vanish overnight. But if the White Walkers were truly near, they needed every ally they could get. Over the days that followed, the uneasy alliance took shape. Some Black brothers spat at the sight of wildlings occupying the castle's outskirts. Tensions flared in small ways, an argument over a stolen piece of bread, a shoving match at the well. Jon, determined to keep order, made it clear that any violence would be punished. He stationed watchers at key points, ordering them to remain calm. Ned stepped in when a confrontation arose one morning, 2 wildlings cornered by a group of Black brothers. With quiet authority, Ned separated them, reminding both sides that they fought the dead, not each other. Among the new arrivals, Ned noticed a silent young boy with pale eyes, no more than 6 or 7. The child stared at Ned whenever he passed, suspicion etched in his features. Ned couldn't blame him. To the free folk, the Black brothers were anathema. Yet children adapt more quickly than adults. Sometimes Ned would catch that boy playing a game in the snow with a Black brother's squire, both giggling despite themselves. Perhaps that was a sign that old enmities could fade. One evening, as Ned patrolled the ramparts, he found Melisandre standing at the edge, gazing north. The sky was heavy with clouds, and snow fell in gentle spirals around them. She said nothing at first, only lifting her chin as if inhaling the chill. Her ruby glimmered faintly. Ned joined her, following her gaze. It was endless white and gray, the forest a mass of black lines beyond the swirling snow. "Do you see anything?" he asked quietly. Her voice came soft, almost lost in the wind. "They are out there, mustering. The cold is deeper than it should be, even for this latitude. I feel the great other's presence encroaching. The White Walkers gather." He recalled the visions in her flames, the glimpse of pale figures. "What do we do? How do we fight them? With fire? With dragonglass? With Valyrian steel? With unity?" Her lips curved into a melancholy shape. "But even all those might not be enough if we do not stand together. Your son has the right idea, forging an alliance with the wildlings. But is the rest of the realm prepared? We are a small outpost against an endless tide." Ned's jaw clenched. "We have no choice but to try. Robb has promised men, but the southern lords are scattered, locked in the War of the Five Kings. Stannis believes he is the rightful king, but who knows if he'll send aid. The Lannisters have King's Landing. The Tyrells have allied with them." He thought of Sansa captive among the Vipers. Guilt churned in his stomach. Yet all roads led back to the same truth: if the White Walkers poured south, the Iron Throne might count for nothing. Melisandre reached out and touched Ned's hand lightly, a gesture that startled him. "You carry a great burden. The Lord of Light gave you breath again, so you might stand against the darkness. But your mortal ties remain strong, your children, your homeland, your memories. Use them as strength, not a weakness." He wanted to pull away, but something in her tone held him. "I never asked to be resurrected," he said, voice rough. "But I will not shy from my duty, not when my family and the entire realm is at risk." She studied him, her red hair dancing in the wind. "You remind me of another man of honor who was once resurrected through Lawloress grace, a man called Beric Dondarrion. Each time he returned, he lost a part of himself, but he found purpose in protecting the weak. You are not him, but your cause is not so different. The Lord of Light chooses no one lightly." Ned felt a flicker of unease, remembering the strange emptiness in his chest that sometimes pulsed at night. Perhaps each day he walked this earth, something of him drifted away. But if that was the price to secure a future for his children, he would pay it. A shout from below drew their attention. A black brother came running into the courtyard, waving a scrap of parchment. Ned and Melisandre hurried down the wooden steps to meet him. The man's eyes shone with urgency as he handed the note to Ned. "Another raven from King Robb, my lord. He says men are on the way." Jon arrived too, breath puffing in the chill air, just as Ned read the letter. It confirmed that a small force led by Mage Mormont of Bear Island and the great Jon Umber would march for the wall within the fortnight, though obstacles remained. The letter also mentioned that tension with the Freys and Lannisters had intensified, making any large-scale movement impossible. Ned passed the note to Jon, relief in his eyes. Reinforcements, however modest, could be the difference between survival and disaster. Jon read it, exhaling. Maybe a few hundred men at most, but they'll have the North's loyalty. Bear Island, especially Mage Mormont's kin, is the old Bear's house. They'll fight like wolves. That spark of hope swept through Castle Black as the news spread. Even the wildlings sensed it, more fighters coming to stand against the rising cold. Yet with hope also came a question: would they arrive before the White Walkers made their move? Days passed in a tense lull. Scouts roved beyond the wall, but often returned reporting only glimpses of scattered whites or small wildling bands, some allied to Mant's raider and heading for Harhome. Rumors abounded that Mance was gathering thousands more free folk, intending to force the wall. Jon wrestled with the question of how to handle such a mass exodus. Ned, for his part, could only counsel caution. They could not fight thousands of desperate wildlings, nor could they fling open the gates entirely. Balancing compassion and practicality was like walking a razor's edge. One bitter dawn, as pale light filtered through the swirling snow, horns blasted from the top of the wall, 2 long blasts, the call for wildlings. Men scrambled to the ramparts. Ned ran alongside Jon, his breath steaming. Above, watchers peered down from the walkway. There, one man pointed, handing a spyglass to Jon. Jon peered through it, then wordlessly passed it to Ned. Through the swirling haze, Ned made out a mass of figures moving across the open plain. Hundreds, maybe more than 1,000. Some were armed, some carried children on their backs, many hauled sledges laden with supplies or the wounded. They advanced slowly. At their head, men on shaggy horses waved crude billets. Nurs. The watchers shifted nervously, glancing at Jon. Would this be an attack or another group seeking refuge? Jon lowered the spyglass. That's Mance's host or a part of it. We're about to have a choice. Do we let them through, or do we fight? Ned heard the tension in Jon's voice. He remembered his own words of caution. Fire or mercy, war or alliance. There might be no simple answer. The men at the top of the wall looked to Jon for direction. Below, the gates were sealed, the courtyard bristling with black brothers and wildlings who had already accepted Jon's truce. Everyone was on edge. Jon swallowed, resolute. We'll signal them to halt. I'll go out with a small party under a white flag, try to speak to Mance Rayder. The rest stand ready. Ned's chest tightened. I'll come with you. Despite some misgivings from the Black brothers, they descended, gathering a contingent of a dozen riders, including Ser Roderick and Tormund Giantsbane, one of the free folk who had chosen to remain at Castle Black after fleeing the White Walkers months ago. Tormund was boisterous and unpredictable, but he also knew Mance personally. That might smooth the negotiations. When they rode out from the gates, they were met by a swirl of freezing wind. The doors groaned shut behind them. Ahead, the huge throng of free folk slowed at the sight of riders approaching. A single horn blew from their side. At the center, a tall man in a patched cloak rode forward on a shaggy brown horse. His hair was mostly gray, his face weathered by countless hardships, but there was a quiet confidence in his bearing. Behind him, a woman with red hair and a fierce gaze kept close watch, and Ned spotted others brandishing bows and spears. The tension weighed heavy. Mance Rayder halted a dozen yards away, eyeing the group that approached. He recognized Tormund first, letting out a short, humorless laugh. So, you're still alive, old friend. I heard you'd gone crow. Tormund snorted. Don't you start. It's the dead we should be afraid of, Mance, not each other. I'm here to help talk sense. Mance turned his attention to Jon, who wore the black cloak of the Night's Watch, though the clasp was a silver wolf's head. You're the boy who's rumored to lead the crows now? He eyed Ned as well, noting the sigil of the direwolf on Ned's garb. And you must be Eddard Stark, the one they say came back from the grave. Ned inclined his head. Word travels fast, I see. It's true enough. Mance's expression flickered with curiosity, then resolved into seriousness. I've heard rumors of White Walkers, an endless night. We've seen enough ourselves. That's why I'm leading my people south. We'll do it by force if we must. We have no desire to die up here in the cold. Jon spoke calmly, though tension thrummed beneath his words. We understand why you're here. We don't want to slaughter you, but we cannot simply let an army of free folk pass without terms. We have to ensure the safety of the realm. Mance's shoulders tightened, his voice edged with bitterness. The realm that's always called us savages, that hunts us for sport, that built that wall to keep us penned like animals? The wind whipped across them, stirring cloaks and rattling weapons. What is your offer, Crow? Jon hesitated, and Ned saw the flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. He recalled that Jon had once met Mance Rayder under different circumstances, had been among the wildlings. Now he had to stand firm as Lord Commander. Jon said, lay down your weapons. Let us search your ranks for criminals. We'll allow you through the gates in groups under guard. You'll be settled in the Gift or as far south as we can manage, so long as you keep the peace. Anyone who raises arms against the Watch or the North will be dealt with. A rustle of discontent rippled through the free folk behind Mance. Angry mutters drifted on the wind. Many brandished their axes or spears in defiance. Ned could see how precarious the moment was. One misstep and they might be forced into a battle that would kill hundreds on both sides. But Mance held up a hand, silencing them. That's a lot of trust you're asking from us, Mance said quietly. We have no love for your kneeler laws, but we fear the dead more. He gazed at the throng behind him, women clutching children, old men leaning on staffs, young warriors with ragged hair. Weariness etched his face. Let me be plain, if you refuse us entry, we'll try to break through. Many will die, but we'll try. We have no choice. Ned nudged his horse forward, the wind stinging his cheeks. If we slaughter you, we only strengthen the White Walkers eventually. That's no victory at all. Jon speaks true. Surrender your weapons, pledge not to harm the realm, and you may pass. Mance Rayder, if you still claim to be king beyond the wall, then lead your people to safety. Show them that there's a better way. Mance regarded Ned warily, as if searching for trickery in his gaze. Then he glanced at Tormund, who gave a shrug and a faint nod. Finally, Mance let out a breath that billowed in the cold air. All right, Crow. You and your ghost lord father. We'll give up our steel, though I'd rather keep it for fighting the dead. but we'll do it if that's the price to keep my people alive." A mixture of relief and tension crackled. This was only the first step in a fragile agreement. Mance raised a hand, calling forward several of his lieutenants. Men and women began lowering or throwing down weapons, though not without sullen glares and curses. Some seemed on the verge of rebellion, but Mance's authority held them in line for now. The watchers from Castle Black remained poised on the walls, crossbows at the ready. A single spark could ignite the entire situation. Jon, Ned, and Tormund oversaw the initial surrender of arms, the piling of axes, bows, swords. Then Jon directed the free folk to proceed in groups toward the gate, where Black brothers would search them for hidden blades. The process was painstaking, nerve-wracking. Hours passed in the freezing wind. The sun made a brief, pallid appearance over the horizon, then sank again behind dark clouds. Night approached, a dangerous time for all. Within Castle Black, the newly arrived free folk joined those already sheltered, though the difference in scale was immense. Rows of campfires lit the courtyard and the outskirts, the swirl of half-frozen breath hanging over a throng that felt more like a small city than a single castle. The Black brothers tried to maintain order, while Mance and Tormund roved among the wildlings, urging them to keep calm and follow the crow's rules. Scuffles broke out anyway, swiftly quelled. The tension was palpable. Ned wandered among them, boots crunching in the snow, cloak pulled tight. He saw huddled families, eyes wide with fear. He passed by wounded men moaning softly, tended by wildling healers who used herbs in a manner different from maesters. Despite his own worries, Ned felt a pang of compassion. These people were not so different from the small folk of the north, just more ragged and forced to survive in a harsher land. And all that now stood between them and the White Walkers was a wall of ice and a tenuous alliance with men who had once been their mortal foes. Late that night, Ned found Jon standing atop the wall, gazing into the distance. The howling wind nearly swallowed their words. Jon spoke first, voice thin in the cold. "I've done it. I've broken an oath older than the Watch itself, letting wildlings pass. Some brothers curse my name. Others hold their tongues." He paused, pressing a gloved hand against the ice-crusted Merlin. "I just hope we haven't invited a nightmare inside our walls." Ned stood beside him, scanning the endless dark. "You did what you had to. If even half of Mance's people remain armed, we'd face thousands of them. The slaughter would be unimaginable, and in the end, the White Walkers would pick through the corpses." He placed a hand on Jon's shoulder. "I'm proud of you. This is leadership, not just fighting battles, but preventing them." Jon's voice quavered. "I never wanted this crown of black, but it's on my head now." Ned remembered, long ago, Robert Baratheon telling him something similar about the Iron Throne, that the weight of a crown was heavier than any man could bear. He offered no easy comfort, only a quiet solidarity. They stood there a long time, father and son, neither truly belonging to the world they had once known, Ned resurrected by red magic, Jon an outsider in the Watch by virtue of his birth and now his rank. Below, torches flickered as more and more wildlings filed in. The night wore on, tension and relief mingling in the freezing air. When dawn finally broke, it revealed a changed Castle Black. The yard and the nearby surrounds were teeming with makeshift shelters, campfires, half-erected tents. The free folk, now half a kingdom in themselves, spilled across the normally sparse grounds of the Watch. Jon ordered the stewards to distribute whatever food they could spare, but rations were already thin. Melisandre roamed among them, offering quiet words in a language few understood. Some of the wildlings recoiled from her, calling her a fire witch, but others watched her with uncertain fascination. In the days that followed, Mance Rayder proved somewhat cooperative. He oversaw the wildlings as they tried to adapt to life behind the wall. Sporadic arguments flared. A Black brother would stumble upon a wildling rummaging in the armory, or a group of free folk would blame the Watch for withholding supplies. Tempers burned hot even in the cold. Jon arranged hunting parties to supplement their stores, pairing experienced rangers with skilled wildling trappers. Tense at first, these expeditions sometimes returned with fresh meat and a cautious sense of camaraderie. Through it all, Ned moved quietly, supporting Jon, defusing conflicts, hearing out complaints. He found himself remembering the days when he had governed Winterfell, listening to the peasants' concerns, settling disputes. But this was on a far more desperate scale, and the watchers in the towers never let their guard down. Winter had truly sunk its claws into the land, the air was frigid, and storms battered the castle frequently. Eventually, the day arrived when the battered banners of Bear Island and House Umber appeared on the horizon, a line of northern soldiers trudging through the snow. Led by Lady Meage Mormont and the Great Jon, they brought fewer men than Ned had hoped, perhaps 300 at best. Still, their arrival lifted the hearts of many. Jon and Ned rode out to greet them at the gates, white banners fluttering in the cold wind. The great Jon, a massive man with wild laughter and a huge sword, dismounted heavily, clasping Ned's arm. "They said you were dead, my lord," he boomed, voice echoing. "I believed it, prayed it wasn't so. But here you are, as real as the snows around us." "How?" He trailed off at a loss for words. Ned managed a small, sad smile. "It's a long tale, great Jon. I'm grateful you've come at all." Lady Meage Mormont, stout and fierce, observed Ned with searching eyes. "We Bear Islanders aren't much for talk of gods, but if a red priestess can bring back the Warden of the North, who am I to doubt?" She jerked her head at the men behind her, clad in thick fur and leather. "We'll fight for you, Lord Stark. The old bear was of our blood, and I'll not see the wall fall to the dead." Jon inclined his head in thanks. "You're welcome here. We've many mouths to feed, wildlings among them, but your men will be valued. We've a war to prepare for." The great Jon barked a laugh at the mention of the wildlings. "So I hear you're bedding down with the free folk. And here I thought I'd seen everything in these wars. Well, if that's what it takes to keep the dead men away, we'll grin and bear it." Ned introduced Jon properly. "This is my son, Lord Commander of the Night's Watch." The great Jon arched an eyebrow. "Aye, your boys come a long way from Winterfell's courtyards." He slapped Jon on the back, nearly toppling him. "We'll follow your lead, Lord Commander. I've more men on the way, though not many. The Freys block the neck, the Lannisters hound us in the south, and the Boltons are stirring trouble. Our king in the north does what he can, but the realm is in chaos." Jon steadied himself, nodding. "We'll make good use of whoever arrives. Come inside. Warm yourselves if you can. Then we'll speak of strategies." They led the newcomers into the already crowded grounds, introducing them to the uneasy alliances in place. The Greyjohn's men roared with laughter at the sight of wildlings skulking around the yard, but they contained their animosity. Lady Meage observed everything with cool determination, sending a few trusted scouts to gather information from the watchers on the wall. Ned watched it all, heart heavy with the knowledge that even with these reinforcements, they were dreadfully outnumbered if the White Walkers arrived in force. Soon enough, strategy meetings commenced in the cramped hall. Jon insisted that each group, Night's Watch, Free Folk, and Northern soldiers, be represented. Mance Rayder joined, ignoring the glares of the great Jon, who stared him down like a bear sizing up a wolf. For hours, they debated how best to position men, how to stockpile resources, whether to send out large scouting parties or hunker down until the White Walkers emerged. The wildlings believed an army of thousands might already be on the march. Some watchers insisted the threat wasn't yet so large. Ned listened, occasionally weighing in. Midway through one heated discussion, Melisandre appeared at the doorway, her face stern. She did not speak right away, merely standing with her ruby flickering in the lantern light. When the arguments died down and all eyes turned to her, she said, "I have seen a vision in the flames. The time for talk draws short. The dead approach." A hush fell. The great Jon snorted, folding his massive arms. "We've heard that for weeks. If they're coming, let them show themselves and we'll chop them down." Mance Rayder shot him a dark look. "That's what you Kneelers said centuries ago. Then you forgot the threat was real. Now we all pay." Melisandre seemed unperturbed by their bluster. "Mock my words if you will, but the White Walkers are not like mortal foes. They bring an endless winter that can devour entire armies. Do not think steel alone will save you." Jon spoke into the tense silence. "We have some dragonglass left by the old bear's stash, and Valyrian steel with me and a few others. Is that truly enough?" "No," Melisandre replied, "but it may tip the scales if used wisely. Fire will help. The free folk know to burn their dead. We must do the same. The whites cannot rise if their bodies are ash." The great Jon grunted. "Aye, we'll burn the corpses once we see them. Let's hope it doesn't come to that." After the meeting, Ned conferred privately with Melisandre. "When you say they approach, do you have a sense of their numbers?" "Their leader." She shook her head slowly. "I see shapes in the flames, tall silhouettes crowned with ice, an army behind them. Time is fluid in the visions. They might come in days or weeks, but come they will." Ned felt the weight of it. He recalled the helplessness in King's Landing, kneeling before Joffrey's dais, the flash of steel. That had seemed like the worst moment of his life. But perhaps a greater horror loomed. He pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the faint pulse that reminded him he was a man half returned from death. This was his second chance to do what was right, no matter how hopeless it might appear. The final days of uneasy peace stretched on. The watchers on the wall rotated in shifts, scanning the horizon. Runners brought in firewood from the forest, constantly fueling the braziers. Some watchers reported hearing eerie howls at night, glimpsing lights in the distant tree lanes. A feeling of anticipation, taut as a drawn bow, pervaded the fortress. Even the free folk, unaccustomed to living under watchful eyes, kept to the rules, for they sensed the common threat looming. Ned spent his time checking fortifications, offering his advice on defenses. He tried to keep morale up among the men, reminding them that they stood for something greater than themselves. Sometimes he would pass by the free folks' campfires and hear songs in the old tongues, laments for lost homes and dead loved ones. He saw children sleeping in their mother's arms, their cheeks ruddy with cold. It brought to mind a memory of Sansa and Arya when they were small, asleep by the hearth in Winterfell's great hall, dreaming of better days. He closed his eyes, fighting the ache of regret. He prayed quietly to the old gods that his daughters were safe, that one day he might hold them again. In the darkest hour of a moonless night, the horns sounded from atop the wall, 3 blasts, the ancient signal for White Walkers. Ned bolted upright from a half-doze, heart hammering. Outside, men shouted in alarm. Within moments, chaos erupted as Black brothers, free folk, and northern soldiers rushed to their posts. The horns echoed, filling the night with dread. Ned grabbed his sword and raced up the wooden steps with Jon at his side, the great Jon lumbering behind, bellowing for men to form ranks. When they reached the ramparts, the freezing wind stabbed at their faces. Torchlight revealed the watchers leaning over the edge. Below, faint shapes moved in the gloom, barely visible amid the swirling snow. An eerie stillness gripped the air, broken only by the crackle of flames on the battlements. Jon lifted a horn to his lips and blew one long note in response, a call to gather. All along the wall, torches and braziers flared as men hurried to vantage points. Ned peered into the darkness. A hush fell as though the world itself held its breath. Then he saw them, a line of figures emerging from the swirling snow, eyes glowing icy blue, arms outstretched. Behind them loomed silhouettes even taller, clad in what looked like pale armor that shimmered in the faint firelight. White Walkers. Dozens at least. Whites by the hundreds, stumbling on stiff limbs. A silent wave of death creeping across the tundra toward the wall. A voice rang out, half-choked with fear. "They're here." Jon grit his teeth, scanning the courtyard below where men and women rushed to defensive positions. "Archers, ready," he shouted. "Light your arrows." A clamor arose as men scrambled to dip arrowheads in the braziers. The great Jon cursed under his breath, gripping his great sword. Melisandre appeared, cloak billowing, her ruby blazing. Ned felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. He remembered his own death, the blackness beyond. Now that same cold threatened every living soul. The unstoppable moment had come. War was upon them, a war for the living against the dead. Ned's heart pounded as he prepared to do his duty, to protect his son, to protect the realm, knowing that this time there might be no second chance if they failed. And so, with the horns echoing over the frozen wastes, Eddard Stark, resurrected Lord of the North, stood upon the wall alongside Jon Snow, the newly chosen Lord Commander, both bracing for the onslaught that could decide the fate of all mankind. And in the swirling snow and the hush of oncoming horror, the ghosts of the Starks who had come before seemed to gather, lending their silent witness as winter rose in all its wrathful power, demanding its due from the realm of the living.